You are a breath held too long in the chest. The cold is a living thing. It seeps not from the air, but up from the stone floor, through the thin soles of your Sunday shoes. A cold so ancient, it feels like it's climbing your bones, trying to reclaim the marrow. The air is thick, syrupy with the smell of damp earth, beeswax, and something else. Something metallic and sweet, like old pennies and wilted flowers. It coats your tongue, a taste of dread. You are 17, but in this moment, you are ageless, a figure carved from fear. Your name is Eleanor Higgins. But the name feels like a borrowed coat, something that doesn't quite fit, not here, not in this place beneath the place you're supposed to be. Your mother's hand is a vice. On your arm. Her grip isn't comforting. It's a shackle. You try to meet her eyes, but she's not looking at you. Her gaze is fixed forward, on the man standing before the stone altar, his silhouette a tear in the fabric of the candlelight. Reverend Whitmore. In the sunlit world above, his voice is a gentle river, guiding the village through psalms and Sunday hymns. Down here, in the belly of the earth, it is the slow, grinding sound of stone on stone. The vessel must be pure, he says, and the words don't echo. They are swallowed by the suffocating silence of the chamber. You are the vessel. You feel the weight of their eyes. Not just the reverend's, or your mother's, or your father's, who stands apart, a statue of silent anguish, his face pale and collapsed. It's the eyes of the others. The village doctor, Dr. Carr, his clinical. Gaze assessing you not as a patient, but as a specimen. Mrs. Thornton, the librarian, her lips a thin, unsmiling line of approval. The pillars of your small world, all gathered here in this secret, breathing darkness beneath St. Mary's Church. They are here to watch you be purified. You wear a simple white dress. It was meant for your confirmation, a celebration of faith. Now it feels like a shroud. A single fat tear escapes and traces a cold path down your cheek. You don't dare wipe it away. To move is to prove you are still here, a thinking, feeling girl. And that is the one thing you cannot be. To survive this moment, you must become what they see. A symbol, an offering, a quiet, obedient vessel. Your gaze drifts past the altar to a small, iron-banded chest. You saw your mother place something inside it earlier. A lock of your hair. From your first haircut, your father's silver pocket watch, your own worn copy of Jane Eyre, tokens of a life that was. A life that you sense with a certainty that freezes your blood is already over. The final entry has been made. The story is finished. The Reverend raises a hand, and a chalice is passed to him. It's not the silver communion cup from the church above. This one is dark, earthen, ancient. He murmurs words in a language that is not Latin, not English, but something older, something that scrapes at the inside of your skull. He turns to your mother. The covenant requires the mother's hand. It is the line of blessing, the line of continuation. Your mother's grip tightens. She pulls you forward. One step, two. The stone is impossibly cold. You look down at the floor, at the intricate, faded patterns carved into it. They are not Christian symbols. They are spirals and knots, symbols of a faith far older and hungrier than the one preached in the light of day, that you risk a glance at. Your father, his eyes are closed now. His hands are clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He is praying, you realize, but not to the God in the stained-glass windows overhead. He is praying to a silence he hopes is empty. The Reverend offers the chalice to your mother. She takes it with a steady hand. She turns to you. Her face, which once held the entire universe of your safety, is now the face of a stranger, a zealot. There is love in her eyes, yes, but it is a terrifying, consuming love. A love that believes this pain is a gift. this erasure, a form of salvation. 4. The good of us all, Eleanor, she whispers, and her voice is the gentlest sound you have ever heard. For the continuation, she brings the cup to your lips. The smell is bitter, earthy. You close your eyes, and for a second, you are not in the crypt. You are a little girl, hiding in the tall grass of the Yorkshire dales. The summer sun warm on your skin, the world an endless promise. A promise that was a lie got. The system isn't a conspiracy of shadows. It's a mechanism that operates in broad daylight, humming quietly in the background of ordinary life. It wears a doctor's coat, a priest's collar, a husband's authority. In 1965 England, this system was an invisible architecture of control. And for a girl like Eleanor Higgins, it was as real and as solid as the stone walls of her family cottage. To understand what happened to the Higgins family, you can't look for a single monster. The monster was the world they lived in. Ashworth, their village in the Yorkshire Dales, was a place held in amber. While London was swinging to the sound of the Beatles and Mary Quant's hemlines were rising, Ashworth remained moored in a past that was not nostalgic, but suffocating. It was a community of barely 300 souls, bound by a web of intergenerational obligations, shared histories, and secrets buried deeper than the Saxon chapel on which St. Mary's Church was built. This was an England still grappling with the ghost of post-war austerity, where tradition was a shield against the unsettling pace of the modern world. In villages like Ashworth, the hierarchy was absolute. At its apex stood the triad of patriarchal authority, the Church, the law, and medicine. The Church of England was more than a place of worship. It was the village's moral and social nucleus. Its vicar was not just a spiritual guide, but a community arbiter, a counselor, and a figure of unquestionable authority. Reverend Harold Whitmore of St. Mary's was the embodiment of this power. A man in his late 50s, with eyes that held a disconcerting stillness, he had cultivated an aura of scholarly mystique. His sermons were layered with esoteric references to local history and what he called the deeper, older truths that lay beneath the surface of conventional faith. For a congregation weary of a rapidly changing world, his words were a comfort, a promise that their ancient roots held a special, sacred meaning. Then there was the law. In 1965, a woman's identity was still legally and socially tethered to a man's. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1923 had granted women the right to divorce on the same grounds as men. But the social stigma, especially in a conservative village, made it an unthinkable option. A woman's property, her reputation, her very place in the community, was contingent on the stability of her marriage and the approval of her husband. Thomas Higgins, Eleanor's father, was a good man, a reliable man who ran the village post office with quiet efficiency. But he was also a product of his time, a man who believed in order, in deference to authority, and in the fundamental principle that a man was the head of his household. This belief, meant to be a source of stability, would become a fatal flaw. Perhaps the most insidious arm of the system was medicine. The National Health Service had made healthcare accessible, but the relationship between doctor and patient, especially a male doctor and a female patient, was one of profound power imbalance. Dr. Edmund Carr, the village physician, was a descendant of one of Ashworth's founding families. He blended modern medicine with a disquieting interest in what he termed the psycho-spiritual constitution of his patients. This was the era before patients' rights were codified. A doctor's diagnosis was final, his recommendations unquestionable. For a young woman, a visit to the doctor could be a profoundly disempowering experience. Questions about her moral hygiene or nervous disposition were common. Invasive examinations were conducted without clear explanation, all under the benevolent guise of professional care. The very concept of bodily autonomy was a foreign language. A girl's body was not her own. It was a vessel for future marriage and childbirth, a resource to be managed and preserved by the patriarchal authorities around her. This was the world Eleanor Higgins was born into, a world where silence was mistaken for peace and obedience was the highest virtue a woman could possess. It was a perfect ecosystem for a darkness that didn't need to break down the doors. The doors were already open. It only needed to be invited inside. The invitation came disguised as intellectual curiosity. It was Eleanor's mother, Ilara, who was first ensnared. Ilara Higgins was a woman of quiet intelligence, a restless mind confined by the rigid expectations of a village wife. Her world was the cottage, the garden, the church-baked sale. She had a hunger for meaning that her life could not satisfy. So when Reverend Whitmore announced the formation of the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society, it felt like a lifeline. The society was presented as a scholarly endeavor. Its mission was to study and preserve the unique folklore and pre-Christian traditions of the Yorkshire Dales. The founding members were the village elite, Reverend Whitmore, Dr. Carr, the librarian Mrs. Thornton, and a handful of others from Ashworth's oldest families. They met in the church vestry, surrounded by dusty hymnals and the smell of old paper. Their discussions were, at first, academic. They spoke of harvest cycles, ancient place names, and the symbolism of the strange, gargoyle-like carvings that adorned St. Mary's exterior. Ilara blossomed. She came home from meetings with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes, talking animatedly about ley lines and the forgotten herbal remedies of their ancestors. Thomas, her husband, was pleased to see her so happy. It seemed a harmless pastime, a way for his wife to engage her sharp mind. Eleanor, then 16, was initially fascinated. She would listen as her mother recounted the tales of Celtic saints and Saxon kings. But a thread of unease began to weave its way through her fascination. The society's focus seemed to shift subtly. The discussions became less about history and more about what the Reverend called experiential understanding. You can't truly know a tradition just by reading about it, Ilara, the Reverend had said one evening, his voice smooth and persuasive. Our ancestors didn't read about their faith. They lived it. They felt it in the turning of the seasons, in the soil, in their very blood. The shift was almost imperceptible. The academic study began to bleed into practical application. It started with Mrs. Wetherb, the village herbalist and a member of the society, teaching the women about the proper plants to grow for spiritual fortitude. Then came the observances. They weren't called rituals, not yet. They were seasonal gatherings, held at dusk in the churchyard to mark the solstices and equinoxes. Small, quiet affairs that felt more like a history reenactment than a religious ceremony. But Eleanor noticed things. She saw the way the members looked at the Reverend, a deference that bordered on veneration. She heard the way they spoke of the old ways with a hushed reverence, as if they were discussing a living faith, not a dead one. One evening, her mother came to her room. "The Reverend thinks it's time you joined us, Eleanor. He says the traditions are strongest when the bloodlines are pure, when the knowledge is passed from mother to daughter." "It's just history, isn't it, Mum?" Eleanor asked, a knot of cold, dread tightening in her stomach. Her mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's more than history, darling. It's our heritage. It's who we are." Dr. Carr agrees. He says it's important for a young woman's spiritual development. The mention of the doctor sent a chill through her. The system was closing ranks. The invitation wasn't a request. It was a summons. Her mother's need for meaning had become a gilded cage, and she was now holding the door open for her daughter. "You are lying on a crinkling paper sheet in Dr. Carr's examination room. The air smells of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and sterile. The room is cold, but you are colder. Your mother sits in a chair in the corner, her hands folded primly in her lap. Her presence is meant to be a comfort, but it feels like a guard's watch. This is not a normal checkup. You are not sick. This is what Dr. Carr called preliminary assessment for the society. He said it was to ensure you were of sound constitution, both physically and spiritually. He enters the room, and the air thickens with his authority. He doesn't smile. His eyes, magnified slightly by his spectacles, are detached, analytical. He speaks to your mother, not to you. As we discussed, Ilara, the vessel must be strong. The lineage must be clear of any deficiencies. He begins the examination. His hands are cold and dry. He listens to your heart, your lungs. Standard procedure. But then it changes. His questions become personal, invasive. He asks about your monthly cycles, about your friendships, about your thoughts and your dreams. The questions are clinical, but the implication is not. He is not assessing your health. He is assessing your purity. Have you had any impure thoughts, Eleanor? He asks, his voice a low, clinical murmur. You feel a hot flush of shame creep up your neck. What is an impure thought? The memory of a boy's hand brushing yours? A line of poetry that made your heart ache? Your silence is taken as an answer. It's common for girls your age to have a nervous disposition, he says, making a note in his file. A certain volatility of the spirit. The society's work will help ground you. It will provide the structure you need. You feel yourself shrinking, becoming a diagnosis on a page. Nervous disposition, volatility of the spirit. These are not medical terms. They are instruments of control. Words to pathologize your identity, your burgeoning womanhood, and render it an illness that only they can cure. The physical. Examination becomes more intimate. His touch is professional, yet it feels like a violation. Each prod and press is an assertion of power, a mapping of a territory he now claims dominion over. Your body is no longer your own. It is a subject of study, a piece of property being assessed for its worth. You stare at a crack in the ceiling, detaching yourself from the girl on the table. You feel a profound sense of betrayal. Your mother, your protector, sits in the corner and allows this to happen, believing it is for your own good. The man who is supposed to heal you is instead dissecting your soul, cataloging your worthiness based on standards you don't understand, but feel in your bones are deeply wrong. When it's over, he turns to your mother. She is suitable, healthy. The vessel is sound. He says it as if you are a piece of livestock, and in that moment you understand. This is not about history. It is not about health. It is about ownership. And you have just been claimed. The society's meetings moved from the vestry to a small, disused room in the rectory. The pretense of academic study began to fall away, replaced by a new kind of learning. Reverend Whitmore called these sessions moral instruction. He claimed that to understand the old ways, they first had to purify their modern minds, unburdening themselves of the anxieties and sins of the contemporary world. This purification took the form of confession. But it was not the anonymous, whispered confession of a Catholic booth. This was face-to-face, a circle of chairs, the Reverend presiding like a judge. Each member was expected to share their private worries, their failings, their secret thoughts. Eleanor sat through the first few sessions in horrified silence. She listened as members of the village confessed petty jealousies, moments of anger, fears about their finances. The Reverend would listen patiently, his head tilted, his expression one of profound empathy. But his advice was always the same. The solution to their anxieties lay in deeper commitment to the society, in surrendering their individual will to the collective good. Then, one evening, his gaze fell on Eleanor. Eleanor, you have been quiet. A young heart should not be so burdened with secrets. What troubles your spirit? The room was silent. Every eye was on her. She felt her mother's hand gently press her back, a silent push. To refuse was to be defiant, to be impure. To have secrets was to be flawed. Her voice was a thin thread. I don't know. Of course you do, the Reverend said, his voice soft, coaxing. Dr. Carr has noted your sensitivity, your dreams. Tell. Use about them. Unburden yourself. Let us share the weight. It was a trap. A velvet-lined trap. Her own doctor had shared his assessment with the group. Her inner world was not her own. It was a topic for public discussion, for group analysis. She felt cornered, exposed. She mumbled something innocuous, a worry about a school exam. But the Reverend saw through it. No, Eleanor, the truth. We are all family here. We are bound by a covenant of trust. The secrets you keep are a poison not just to you, but to all of us. They weaken the vessel. The pressure was immense. The collective gaze of the group, the pleading in her mother's eyes, the Reverend's unyielding stare. It felt like a physical force pressing in on her. And so she broke. She confessed a small, true fear and nightmare she'd had, a feeling of being watched, of being lost in the fog on the moors. She expected comfort. Instead, the Reverend seized on it. "Ka," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Hey." Fog, a classic symbol of spiritual confusion. Your spirit is crying out for guidance, for a path. You see, the old ways are already speaking to you. You are afraid because you are fighting your own nature. He had taken her fear and twisted it into a validation of his own dogma. He had turned her vulnerability into a weapon against her. From that moment on, her thoughts were no longer her own. Every doubt she had, every flicker of rebellion, was reframed as a symptom of her spiritual confusion, a weakness that required more instruction, more guidance, more control. The act of confession had not freed her. It had handed her jailers the key to her own mind. Thomas Higgins was a simple man, but he was not a fool. As the autumn of 1965 deepened, a gnawing unease took root in his heart. His wife was disappearing into the society, her language filled with strange, fervent talk of covenants and obligations. His daughter was growing more withdrawn, her eyes holding a haunted look he didn't understand. The house, once a haven of predictable comfort, now felt heavy with secrets. The breaking point came when Alara informed him that the society required a significant contribution from its core families to fund the acquisition of historical artifacts. It was a large sum, one that would eat into their modest savings. "Alara, this has gone too far," Thomas said one evening, his voice tight with worry. "It's a historical society. Why do they need so much money? And these late-night observances? It's not right." Alara's reaction was not what he expected. There was no discussion, no compromise. Her face hardened, and her eyes took on the zealot's light he was coming to dread. "It is not for you to question, Thomas. It is an obligation. The Reverend and Dr. Carr have explained its importance. It is for the protection of this community, for the protection of our family." Thomas decided to act. He was a man who believed in systems, in rules. He would go to the authorities. He made an appointment with the local solicitor in the next town over, a man with no connection to Ashworth. He sat in the musty office, explaining his situation in low, halting tones. He spoke of the society, the money, the strange influence, of the Reverend, his wife's obsessive behavior, his daughter's fear. He expected legal advice, a course of action. Instead, the solicitor, a portly man with tired eyes, listened, made a few notes, and then leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Higgins," he began, his tone weary, "what you're describing is a community group, a rather eccentric one perhaps. But your wife is participating willingly. As a married woman, her property is entwined with yours. Yes, but there's no legal basis to prevent her from donating to her church group. But the amount and the effect it's having on my daughter Does your wife have a medical history of instability? The solicitor asked. No, of course not. Has the Reverend threatened you? Not with violence, but there's a pressure. He talks about consequences for those who break the covenant. The solicitor sighed. Mr. Higgins, spiritual pressure is not a matter for the courts. Unless you can prove criminal action, theft, assault, illegal confinement, my hands are tied. Your wife is being influenced by her priest. This is a matter for the church, not the law. Thomas left the office feeling utterly defeated. The very system he trusted, the law, had rendered him powerless. His wife's actions were protected under the guise of religious freedom and marital unity. He was the man of the house, but he had no legal authority to protect his family from a threat that had no name, no clear crime he could point to. He was trapped. The social fabric of the village, the deference to the reverend, the legal framework of marriage, it all worked together to create a cage with invisible bars. To fight against the society would be to fight against his wife, his church, his community, and the law itself. He was one man against an entire system, and the system was closing in. As the nights grew longer and colder, a new phase of instruction began. Reverend Whitmore announced that the spiritual needs of men and women were different, and therefore their teachings must be separated. The men would continue their historical studies, while the women, under the guidance of Alara and Mrs. Thornton, would receive what he called the legacy of the mothers. The meetings for the women and girls were held in a different location, a small, isolated cottage on the edge of the moors, owned by the Thornton family for generations. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. There were no chairs. They sat on cushions on the floor, a circle of women, ranging in age from Eleanor to the elderly Mrs. Weatherby here. The last vestiges of academic pretense were stripped away. The teachings were a disorienting mix of distorted folklore, herbalism, and a strange, invented theology centered on the sacred role of the female bloodline. Mrs. Thornton, her voice a dry whisper, would read from old, leather-bound journals the supposed wisdom of generations of Ashworth women. They were taught that their bodies were not their own, but holy vessels connected to the land itself. Their monthly cycles were not a biological function, but a sacred rhythm that aligned them with the moon and the tides. Their purpose was not to think or to act, but to feel, to receive, and to pass on the sacred essence of the lineage. You are a channel, Mrs. Thornton would say, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. A conduit for the power that protects. This valley, your obedience is not submission. It is your strength. Your silence is not weakness. It is your sacred duty. They were taught rituals of purification, baths infused with specific herbs, chants that had to be repeated until the mind was empty, diets that were meant to cleanse the body of modern toxins. It was a regimen designed to break down their individuality, to dissolve their sense of self into a collective, mystical purpose. Eleanor felt herself suffocating. The teachings were a direct assault on her mind, on the sharp, curious girl who loved books and logic. She saw the effect it was having on the other women. They embraced it. For women like her mother, whose lives were constrained and unfulfilling, this secret knowledge was intoxicating. It gave them a sense of importance, of power, that their ordinary lives denied them. They were no longer just wives and mothers. They were priestesses, guardians of a sacred trust. Eleanor was the only one who resisted, and her resistance was seen as a dangerous flaw. Her questions were met with pitying looks. Her silence was interpreted as stubborn pride. She was a discordant note in a carefully orchestrated hymn of obedience. And the more she struggled, the more they focused on her, convinced that her purification was the most critical of all. The moment of absolute betrayal did not come with a shout, but with a whisper. It was the moment love was revealed as the most Perfect and terrible tool of control. Had been a week of escalating pressure. Eleanor's resistance in the legacy of the mother's sessions had become a problem. She refused to chant. She questioned the logic of the rituals. Her defiance was a crack in the smooth facade of their collective faith. One night, her mother came into her bedroom. The house was quiet. Her father was at a late meeting at the post office, or so he'd said. Eleanor was reading Jane Eyre by the light of a small lamp, trying to escape into a world where a woman's spirit could be a fire, not a vessel to be filled. Ilara sat on the edge of the bed. Her face was soft with a sorrow that terrified Eleanor more than any anger could have. "You're making this so difficult, Eleanor," she said, her voice barely audible. "What am I making difficult, Mom?" "I don't believe it. The things they say, the rituals, it's not right." "It's not for you to believe," Ilara replied, her patience wearing thin. "It's for you to accept. The Reverend says your doubt is a sickness. It's putting us all at risk. The final observance is soon. You have to be ready. You have to be pure." "I won't do it," Eleanor whispered, clutching her book like a shield. Ilara's eyes hardened. For a moment, Eleanor saw the woman. She had once been sharp, intelligent, willful. But the moment passed, and the zealot returned. "You think you have a choice?" Ilara stood up and walked to Eleanor's small wardrobe. She opened it and took out the simple white dress from her confirmation. She laid it on the bed. "You will wear this tomorrow night. There is a special ceremony, just for you. A final cleansing." No. The word was small, but it was all Eleanor had left. Her mother turned, and her expression was one of profound, tragic love. It was the look of someone about to perform a painful but necessary surgery. "Your father agrees," she said softly. "He understands now. He understands that some things are more important than our own small fears. He understands that the family's spiritual health is his responsibility." That was the blow. The final, shattering blow. Her father. Her quiet, steady father. The last anchor in her storm-tossed world. They had gotten to him. They had broken him. The system he believed in, the authority of the church, the sanctity of his marriage, his duty as a husband, had been turned against him, and against her. Eleanor looked at her mother, at this stranger, who wore her mother's face, and saw the truth. She was utterly, completely alone. Her love for her parents was a chain, pulling her under. Their love for her was the justification for her ERSURE. In that silent bedroom. With the white dress lying on the bed like a ghost, Eleanor's spirit didn't just break, it collapsed. She felt a profound, hollowing exhaustion, the kind that comes after a battle you never had a chance of winning. She thought of the caged bird, the linnet in the poem, beating its wings against the bars until they are bloody and broken. And then it simply stops. It sits on its perch and sings a quiet, mournful song of its cage. She would wear the dress. She would go to the ceremony. There was nothing left to fight for. The silence she had been fighting against had won. It had filled up the world. You are back in the cold, back in the earth. The white dress is a film of ice against your skin. The air is the same thick with beeswax, damp soil, and the sweet, cloying smell of fear. But something is different tonight. The faces of the others are no longer just watching. They are expectant. This is the culmination. The harvest. You are no longer Eleanor Higgins. That girl, the one who loved books and the smell of rain on the moors, has been hollowed out. You are only a vessel now, an empty space waiting to be filled with their purpose. The fight has gone out of you, replaced by a strange, floating calm. A surrender so complete, it almost feels like peace. Your mother leads you to the center of the room, before the black stone altar. Your father stands beside her. He will not look at you. His face is a mask of gray stone. He has become a part of The architecture of this place, another silent pillar holding up the weight of this ancient, hungry faith. The Reverend begins to speak. His voice washes over you, no longer frightening, just a sound like the wind. He talks of the covenant, of the sacrifice that nourishes the roots of the community. He speaks of renewal, of the cycle of death and rebirth. It is all just words. They cannot touch you any more. They hand your mother the earthen chalice. You know what is in it, the bitter herbs of forgetting. The draught of surrender. She brings it to your lips. You don't resist. You drink. The liquid is cold, then hot. It burns a path down your throat. For a moment, the world sharpens. The faces around you become grotesquely clear. Dr. Carr's clinical curiosity, Mrs. Thornton's thin, triumphant smile, your mother's desperate, loving eyes. You see it all. You see the system in its final, perfect operation. A circle of believers, sacrificing a child to appease a god of their own making, a god built from fear and a hunger for control. Then the sharpening dissolves. The edges of the world begin to blur. The candlelight softens and spreads, bleeding into the darkness. The faces melt into indistinct, swaying shapes. The sound of the chanting becomes a deep, oceanic hum that resonates inside your skull. You feel your knees buckle. Your mother and father hold you up, one on each arm. They are no longer your parents. They are attendants, fulfilling their sacred role. They lower you gently onto the cold, black stone of the altar. You stare up at the suffocating darkness of the ceiling. It feels like the sky, a sky with no stars. A memory surfaces, bright and painful. You are 5 years old. You have scraped your knee. Your father is carrying you home, his hand stroking your hair. "It's all right, my Eleanor," he says. "I've got you. I'll always keep you safe." The memory is so vivid, it brings a single tear to your eye. It rolls down your temple, into your hair, a last remnant of the girl who was. A final, silent protest. The Reverend is standing over you now. He is holding something, a knife, not a weapon of violence, but a ceremonial tool. It is ornate, ancient, its blade the color of the winter sky. He raises it. You close your eyes. You do not feel fear. You do not feel pain. You feel only a profound, bottomless sorrow for the girl who believed her father's promise. The humming grows louder. It is inside you now. It is the sound of your own name being unwritten, the sound of a story being erased, page by page. The Higgins family did not just disappear. They were undone. They were meticulously, lovingly, and systematically dismantled by the very world that was supposed to protect them. They were offered up to the quiet, respectable, and monstrous God of obedience. And as the darkness takes you, your last thought is not of the life you are losing, but of the book you left behind. On your nightstand, its pages still holding the ghost of your touch. A story of a girl with a fiery spirit who refused to be broken. A story that, in this world, was just a fairy tale. The official report, sealed for decades, would state that the Higgins family of Ashworth, Yorkshire, vanished without a trace in the autumn of 1965. An unsolved local mystery. But there is no mystery. It was a ritual, a successful one. A family was consumed, their silence purchased, and the system, satisfied, continued its quiet, ceaseless hum. If voices like hers matter to you, subscribe. More truths are waiting.